UTSA football post-game wrap-up. I'm JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express
How's it
News.
going?
The Roadrunners have a thrilling come-from-behind, dramatic, everything tonight against La Tech. 27-26. The Roadrunners rally for 14 fourth-quarter points. Greg, did you think UTSA could pull this one out tonight?
So, I only wrote that they lost once or twice.
Yeah, same here.
The story was done
third
early
quarter,
in the fourth quarter.
Oh, yeah, mine was third quarter.
Not the full one. I wouldn't do that to the people, but you got to have something to go up right away.
You got to have something, yeah.
I had 300 words about how the offense struggled and Frank Harris couldn't get it going, and Sincere McCormick was averaging 2-point-something yards per carry or whatever it probably was at that point, and then it just came together. And really, it started in the third quarter because they scored the first drive out of halftime.
Yes,
and so once they threw the pick six, it felt like that was a
setback.
Yeah.
I thought
that
was it.
Felt like that was it.
Yeah.
Because on the other hand, it was like, well, aside from that mistake, they had shown that they could do it. But then I think they got stopped one more time after that, and that was when I started writing. Yeah. Because it was like, okay, now you're down 13, and you've already shown you're not going to score every drive this half or whatever. So, yeah, it seemed like they were out of it, and then they just kept going, and they came back and they pulled it out. And we talked about, in the post-game press conference, they talked a lot about this halftime speech from Coach Traylor that really fired everybody up, and he said he got so animated that he broke a bracelet that Javion Cardwell gave him, and so certainly he showed some fire, and he said it was like a withdrawal from all that he's put into the kids, and that he's not usually like that, and you can't be like that all the time or else it wouldn't work, but he brought that energy today. He
called it a tale of two halves, and I mean, if you go back and look at the stats, especially on the defensive side, the defense came out in the second half and just really clamped down. I think we mentioned that Louisiana Tech had the pick six, so that kind of skewed some of the stats.
So they were good before that, though, too. Yeah. I mean, they weren't 35 yards good or whatever Louisiana Tech got in the second half, but they had held them to, it was certainly less than 5 yards of play. It might have been about 4.5, and Louisiana Tech was really having to work for their points, which is like they scored on 5 of 6 drives in the first half. So it feels like that's going to be a really, really productive day. But it was a grind for them to do it, and UTSA got the stops when they needed to keep them out of the end zone. And so really it felt like the defense was going to do their part either way. Like even if it ended up being that Louisiana Tech had 26 points on the board, it felt like a really good defensive game, but then it just kept getting stronger and stronger. And in the second half, they really couldn't get anything going.
Yeah, I thought they gave up it was a bend but don't break a defense in the first half, and I thought eventually they'd wear down because really UTSA's offense didn't do much in the first half to really help the defense at all.
The concerning thing with UTSA's defense was that early in the game, it felt like Louisiana Tech could get the run game going a little bit. But then by the end of the game, they were averaging, I think, 2.9 yards per rush. Yeah.
I remember asking you in the middle of the game, is Louisiana Tech winning the battle of the trenches?
And for a time, they were,
They were, but at the end of the game, they weren't. So let's talk about the fourth quarter, some of the big plays. I think the Tyke 54-yard reception that set up the Sincere McCormick touchdown, to me, that's where the game turned.
Yeah, that was an important one, and he had 4 catches for 96 yards. It was his first significant action. I know that they said he played last week. I don't remember how many snaps he got.
I didn't see him,
but it was not. He didn't catch a pass, and he wasn't a relevant contributor. So this was his real return to action, and it's crazy because now we've seen Cephas can have big games, and Zakari can have big games,
Dingle.
and Tyke can have big games, and so you feel really good about the receiving. But yes, to focus in on that fourth quarter, he has that big catch, and there was every time he got the ball, it felt like he was breaking tackles and making something happen, and his big catch there set up an easy run for Sincere, who he didn't need a lot of help at times.
No, he did it,
37 carries for, I want to get it right, 165 yards and 3 touchdowns. So
3 touchdowns. The 3 touchdowns was huge. That 45-yarder
was the next one. So, so that
amazing.
That touchdown pulls them within 6, and then has the other touchdown a little bit later in the quarter to put them ahead 27-26. So that was a huge play in the game.
I thought it was interesting that Jeff Traylor said in post-game that they knew they were going to ride him almost that much. Were you surprised about that?
Well, I think they wanted to have the option if they needed it in a conference game. And I don't know to what extent they limited him. I remember last week we talked about it felt like there were stretches of the reins back a little, going as crazy as they could, and that's why he really showed up in the fourth quarter of that one, or however it had played out. And I think we had asked him about, do you try to conserve guys? And he said, oh, you can't think about it that way. You can't do that. And today he said, I was just playing. Absolutely.
We can't tell you guys everything. So
yeah. I think it was important that they did that because you can't give him... Because he had 2 catches, too. So you can't have... So he had 39 touches.
Yeah.
And you can't have 40 touches a game regularly. So... And you can't argue that this wasn't worth it, right?
Yeah.
Like, if they lose this game... If they lose this game by,
6...
Well...
10.
He had maybe 20-something carries when they were down 13 still. So if they don't come back and you're running him that much, that becomes tough. Yeah. I don't know how much a guy can hold up for 12 games without an open date, playing the amount of touches that he's getting. And maybe when Brendan Brady returns, potentially the load gets lightened a little bit. But the fact that he's their clear best player, they know they're going to get him the ball when they need to. And I think you have to be willing to ride a guy in a game that was as important as this one.
Let's talk about how important this game was. The Roadrunners come in losing the last 3, and they're kind of in no man's land as far as where it feels like the season is going. And for 3/4 of this game, it felt like it was almost circling the drain a little, and then they rally, and all of a sudden it feels like it's a crossroads of the season a little.
So the interesting thing was last week was the first game where you didn't look at it and feel like they either won or outperformed expectations, one of the two. So to go from that to a game where if you lose this one, now you're 1-2 in the conference and you've lost 4 in a row, and where does that put your confidence now when you're going on the road and whatever other challenges may lie ahead? So that would have been a very tough pill to swallow and a tough thing to move forward from. Versus now, you're 4-3.
Yep.
And you can still feel good about. It's easier to feel good about losing to UAB and BYU when you're 4-3 than it is when you're 3-4 and it's part of a 4-game losing streak. So I think it's just a huge swing for confidence and how they can feel about their mentality going forward from here to have this win versus to not. And at a certain point, I mean, if you're gonna hang with UAB and you're gonna beat this team here, Louisiana Tech, at a certain point you start thinking about where you can finish in the conference and things like that too.
That's
so
exactly where
even just from a perspective of the standings, it's an important win.
I mean, if you just look at the West Division where it is, I mean, historically, you're not going to be among the top with 2 or more losses.
Right.
So La Tech came in almost in a must-win situation if they wanted to compete for that. This allows UTSA to stay in that race with 5 games left. And, I mean, who knows how good Rice is and FAU are, but, I mean, those are certainly winnable games these next 2 weeks.
Right. So it just sets up well, to have some of these harder games out of the way early and to have the confidence of this one does put you in a good position moving forward for sure. And it just, there's so much uncertainty this season. We've talked about it a million times, but who knows how healthy a team's going to be in a given week, how many guys they're going to have available, and what this whole situation might look like. So you got to take your wins where you can get them, but it is good to beat a team of this caliber on this day and to be 2-1 and 4-3 overall.
I don't know that we got a COVID update before this game as far as who was available. It seemed like more players were here this week versus last week.
We didn't see a whole ton of guys missing, so didn't get the exact number. We can try to circle on that for Monday, but it seems like certainly there were no further problems.
Right.
We know still what's being dealt with is from a couple weeks ago, whenever that test came back and the resulting tracing happened.
I think Rashad Wisdom banged up his shoulder or something. I don't know if there were too many injuries coming out of this game.
Yeah, I don't know. Kevin Davis, I don't remember if he finished the game or not. These are things that I have to look back at.
Yeah, it seemed like almost for a second Frank Harris got a little banged up there early on.
Yeah, the one where he threw the interception to McCormick on the screen pass, he went down and it was like it was a low hit, which is always scary, but he also kind of like was twisting as he fell, and you don't want to see that with his history of knee problems and even what he's dealing with this season with the sprain from, gosh, it's like a month
yeah,
ago now.
3 weeks from yesterday, I think.
So yeah, that was good to see that he was able to finish the game, and there were times where he looked fine, I thought, but certainly that moment was scary. But they didn't really talk to him too long about it, and they didn't get anybody warmed up, and it felt like they never were too worried about that.
What about just the mental makeup of this team to be able to rally and come back? I don't know, like, no disrespect or shade to any previous teams, but I don't know if last season this team could have made that comeback.
Yeah, it was interesting. Coach Traylor said when you really challenge the guys like he did in the locker room, that you don't know how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
Maybe you get this outpouring of energy and you find a spark and your team has new life in the second half. And maybe they just say, well, how about you? Like,
you're the one who calls the plays.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe they just don't, it makes them more dejected and less fired up. Or it's like, oh, we're down 2 touchdowns. You yelling at me isn't going to help. Like, people can respond in any number of ways. And for him to the first time doing that, you can imagine how different things would be if it didn't work. It's a bold play by him to really bring some extra fire, and who knows if they don't respond in the season, where the season goes from there. Yeah. But fortunately for them, it all worked out in the best way you could have hoped for.
Yeah, I think this is probably the biggest win of the season for these guys.
Yeah, certainly, being that it's a conference game and the quality of your opponent, and having lost to this team 6 in a row. Yeah. I mean, at this team, they've won a bowl game at the end of 6 straight years. Yeah. And UTSA has been to 1 bowl game. That's the level that you want to be on. Trailer said this week it's a matchup of, I don't want to misquote him now, but something about, a team that's used to winning versus a team that's not used to winning and wants to be used to winning, that kind of thing. Like, they want to get where this program is. And maybe not this year, who knows how well the season's going to go for Louisiana Tech overall. But in the general sense, to be able to play with a team like this is an improvement.
We hit on everything, lots of media timeouts today, early on.
There was a good flow early, and then there wasn't as much.
Grind to a...
There was something else. Oh, can we talk about Frank Harris?
Yeah.
What did you think about his play?
I think he was sporadic. I mean, he admitted it during postgame. He said he played terribly.
Yeah, I wouldn't say...
I don't think he
was, but it wasn't terrible.
No, I thought he was okay getting out of the pocket. Certainly, there's still protection issues with the offensive line, and I think he got sacked 4 times. At one point, it was 4 times for 27, 20, and I mean, just his ability. We all know his athletic ability, but the passing. I mean, that's still an issue moving forward, and I think he's still learning these wide receivers.
Yeah. I'd have to look back at the sacks, but I thought actually the protection held up pretty well through the day. Yeah. I felt like he had a lot of time pretty often, and at least on 1 or 2 of the sacks, I thought he had time to get it out. We saw some of the issues that we've seen from him before. Maybe some of these routes that Lowell gets a lot of credit for throwing, these out routes. Yeah. Especially like opposite hash kind of stuff. That maybe his passes just don't have the zip to get in there cleanly. And they completed some of those throws, but it's just the guy has to be more open, and it takes longer time for the ball to get there, so you sort of limit your yards after catch potential a little bit. And, the big pass to Tyke was, I don't think it's a play where you intend to hit him in stride. Like, he put it out there so that Tyke...
Kind of like back shoulder.
Yeah, so that Tyke could find it and come back to it and make the catch. So it was a fine throw, and there was another downfield throw he made that didn't connect, that at least, looked like he had good zip on the ball and was comfortable making the throw. But there was another time, on the flea flicker, he threw into, I think it was actually quadruple coverage.
Yeah, 4 guys.
And it was just that play's never going to get completed. So just things that he's going to want to refine and be a little bit better moving forward. But it's been a tough, it's
tough month for him, I think.
It's been a good year for him in the sense that he's played more than he's been able to play before. But it's been a tough month in the sense that he was hurt, and then he's been kind of getting banged up within games, and then he loses his starting job. And I wrote about this week that it's the first time he ever lost his starting job because they said we would rather play this player. Yeah. It's always been just because he was injured. And so what effect does that have on you mentally when, you're essentially benched or moved down the depth chart? And I don't think that he was rattled today or looked too out of it mentally. That's hard to judge, but just maybe not his best game, and I think maybe better days are ahead. If he benefited from getting some more of the reps back this week, maybe next week is even better, and maybe he continues to get healthier too. Also, you could say maybe he continues to get banged up as he keeps playing, but I imagine that it should get better unless it gets substantially worse.
I also think they're still trying to figure out what game plan works for him best as well.
That's fair. Yeah,
some of the plays are not certainly his strong suit, but he did make some plays. There was a 4th and 1 bubble screen they did that I thought was a pretty interesting play call, but he executed it pretty well. And then on the McCormick touchdown, the pitch was really good.
I really thought that play was dead.
Yeah.
And he had to pitch it at the speed and angle that he did and put it right on the money. Yeah. And it's a 8-foot throw or whatever, but it still had to be perfect for McCormick to be able to keep his momentum and get in the end zone, and I thought he handled that play well.
I do think his best football, along with the offense's best football, is still ahead of him. They're still, I think, working through things.
It was funny, the first couple weeks of the season, I felt like every week it was like, are you adding to the playbook? Like, what new stuff are you doing?
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where it's like, I'm not even asking.
Yeah,
like, of course you aren't.
Yeah,
like, you have 5 quarterbacks and you're trying to get your offensive line
We're
together.
just trying to get by here.
How can you be expected to be growing what you're doing on offense and adding new stuff when you can't keep the same guys on the field? So the offensive line, I think, is closer to what their ideal would be when you see that Spencer's back in at left tackle and Mekhi Hart's over at right tackle, and then you have Kevin Davis and Mako, which is exactly what you want. That other spot,
the left
to figure
guard
out, like
still,
Terrell Haynes was playing, and I don't know. I kept trying to think to look, but the game was getting pretty intense at that moment. I don't know who even came in after Kevin Davis went down, but if that becomes an issue long term, you're going to see even more kind of just trying to figure it out there. And that's where it's good to have a guy like Mako who can make all the calls and sort of lead that group, but it makes it harder as an offensive unit to be like, okay, we're going to... I mean, and even this week you get Tyke back.
Yeah.
Right? And now you have a new receiver that you're working into the mix, too. So there's just so much shuffling and changing that I think hopefully they can find a game plan week to week that they feel good about, and they'll worry about really expanding the full playbook, I don't know, in the spring or whenever they get to it.
Chapter 7 was an interesting one.
Chapter 7 is in the books. Chapter 8 coming up. I don't know. I think we covered about all of it.
What do you think about the chapters? How you think the guys are kind of responding to that? It seemed like this week that was well received by the guys.
We talked about this before, I think, but it's one of those things where it's like you can talk about the triangle of toughness and the culture pillars and all of these little, maybe they're mnemonics or like whatever, like these like type of like learning inspirational tools that he comes up with to try to fire the guys up. And the chapters in the book was the one of those that they went with this week, that we're hitting our plot twists and our adversity now, and then we'll get to the climax and it'll be a happy ending or whatever. And so that stuff works if you're winning. Right? And I feel like if the season started to go bad and if people weren't buying into it, it would be like, what is this goof talking about with all this wacky stuff? But like, the point is that they bought into it.
Yeah.
And I think that Traylor is also smart enough that if they weren't like feeling it, like if it wasn't vibing with the team in a way that they were reacting to it the way that I just mentioned, where they're like, this guy's kind of wacky, then he wouldn't do it that way. So I think he's just found what works for this group of players, and that they vibe with what he's got and what he's selling to them, and what they're buying into, and trying to really get these culture pillars and get that triangle of toughness and make it all work.
Well, that'll wrap it up. UTSA improves to 4-3 after 7 games, 2-1 in conference play. Up next is a road game at FAU next Saturday morning. And we'll see what Chapter 8 of the Roadrunners book holds. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. Appreciate you guys watching.
See you on Zoom.